Welcome back to episode 9 out of 12 on our Altar Oracle Kickstarter series. This time I'm breaking down the storm god motif associated with the zodiac sign Sagittarius. The Kickstarter has reached its goal, and there are 4 more days to go. It will end on December 26th, a day after Christmas. Luckily, this means that we will be able to print the decks. There's still time to pre-order a deck for yourself by following the link in the description. I want to give a heartfelt thanks to everyone who helped fund our newest deck. This was a really important project to me, as I hope you can tell with how much effort I put out on these videos. I'm still finishing the guidebook for the deck, which I've been working on alongside this series, and I really want to improve on them and improve on this whole system going forward next month and hopefully on into the future. This will be my last video released in this series before the new year. Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces will follow in January. As a bonus, I will try to put out one more video before the year ends about the pagan roots of Santa Claus. I'm really excited about this one, so look out for it. We have Sagittarius, possibly the most popular deity on Earth, apart from Sky Father and Earth Mother. How often he is the king, how often he is the primary hero and the archetype of the hero. We talked about how Lazarus is a sort of hero in that Hector protector kind of way. THANDROS is the kind of hero who goes on adventures, who makes great conquests. Although not explicitly a war god in all times, the focus, like with Sagittarius, is more on adventure and exploration. He's based on the thunder gods from various pantheons, like Thor, most significantly, of Anglian, so that's Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo part. That is Thor from Norse. It's basically the same between Germanic and Norse. Thor is something of this adventurous hero, right? He isn't explicitly king, because Odin in the Norse pantheon is king, but Thor is the most powerful, most popular son of the king. And even in heathenism today, he is one of the most popular deities, of course, to worship. And Mjolnir is one of the most popular symbols used for heathenism. Then there's Tarhana, which I mentioned in the Hittite video that I did last. His name also related to thunder. Tarhana is a little bit more like Zeus as a king of the gods. And that's similar to Jove or Jupiter of the Romans, the namesake of the planet Jupiter, and Perkunos, who's the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European thunder god who splits off into various different thunder gods. Perun is one such very closely related Slavic version of Perkunos. The Slavic and Baltic cultures are some of the most closely linguistically related to the Proto-Indo-European. Similar, there's also like Perendi for the Illyrians and such. The Indo-European thunder god is very important, and for them was the king of the pantheon. And in many different mythologies, like say in Greek, you have Zeus usurping his father Kronos, who was the previous king of Olympus. And what that represents when you find a passing from one generation to another of deities, from the Titans to the Olympians, it means or indicates that there was a cultural shift, or that maybe an invading people, in this case the Indo-Europeans, came in and supplanted and usurped the previous mythology, but kind of integrated it into a story. A story that, in this case, as with many cases with the thunder god, the phrase, "history is written by the victors," applies here. Zeus usurps Kronos, Jupiter usurps Saturnus, Tarhana comes in and usurps Kumarbi. Marduk of Babylon, their thunder god, essentially usurps El. There's a kind of rewriting of history. Originally, with the origin story of the Sumerians, it's Enlil, the mountain god, more akin to Kumarbi and Kronos, who is the king of the gods. And he is the one who defeats Tiamat, the chaotic, draconic sea goddess, in order to establish order over the world. The Sumerians are not considered a Semitic culture. Their language, at least, was of some different make. But when the Semites came in with the Akkadians and then the Amorites who became Babylonians, they rewrote the story and had a new character, Marduk, who is their kind of war and thunder god. And in that very same story, in this rewrite through the Enuma Elish, it is Marduk who defeats Tiamat. It's somewhat related to the Martu deity that I referred to earlier in reference to Lazarus again. Martu has more of ram and war connotations, and so I placed him within Ares and Lazarus, but there are aspects of him, as I mentioned with Baal Hamon much later, that are conflated with a Zeus-like storm thunder god, in which case there's a coupling of these war and thunder motifs into a single entity. Other versions of him directly in Syria and with the Phoenicians would be Hadad and Baal, like I mentioned. Baal, of course, relates again to that Carthaginian Punic deity of Baal Hamon, and Hadad actually relates a little bit to that Hamon, Amun sort of language as well. Enlil himself, just like Kronos himself, usurped a deity from before him, and that would indicate that this deity that they usurped was very old, even older than the Sumerians, even older than Neolithic Bronze Age Greeks, which we call Helladic peoples. That would be Oranos, or Anu, Skyfather, which again we've established is one of the oldest and most widespread deities in history. There was Skyfather, and then there was a mountain king who led the Golden Age defined by the Neolithic by farming and agriculture. And then we have a youthful, adventurous, warlike storm god come on and become king. If I can simplify it, make it very bare bones, you could say that the Stone Age god was Ornos, the Skyfather, that the Neolithic god was the settled agricultural king like Kronos, and that the Iron Age Indo-European god was like Zeus. Indra is another deity, this of the Vedic Hindu pantheon. The Vajra that is portrayed here with the card is based on Indra's Vajra, which is a symbol of power and essentially represents the thunderbolts that he's holding. Sometimes, say in Africa, they're called thunderstones, and the idea of a thunderstone is that when lightning strikes, it's almost like a meteor. There's a rock that's being thrown. If you see lightning strike, you can go out there and find a rock, the thunderstone of that lightning strike. The Vedic period that I'm referring to here is, again, an Indo-European, the Aryan period in India, which is after the original Indus River Valley civilization, which was more Neolithic and had Middle Eastern roots. Dravidian language, for instance, is found to be potentially related to the Susian or Elamite language, which was a language group and culture that was right next to the Sumerians, more toward Iran. And so this all proves a link between the Indus Valley and the Middle East, that there was some linguistic and cultural exchange between them. In the Hindu pantheon today, we have largely two deities that are some of the most important. The two main sects of Hinduism, even though there are many other sects and subsects. Shaivism, which is around Shiva, and then there's Vaishnavism, which is around Vishnu. And Shiva and Vishnu are somewhat opposites in certain ways, but they're not vilifying each other. They have different motifs and different worldviews, I suppose. And really it just means there's two separate deities there that are highly important. Often they are conflated with other deities within their respective pantheons. One such sect, other than those two, would be Shaktiism. And Shaktiism is named after Shakti, who's essentially the goddess of life and energy and vitality, the feminine force of the universe of creation. And Shakti's partner essentially is Indra. And the two of them, ironically, the Shak sound, essentially represents the same Sagittarian energy. And Shaktiism actually spread largely into Indonesia and Java and Bali and such, which is why they have certain translations of Shaktic deities like Indra, Intra, and Indanda and such in the Southeast Asia. Shaivism with Shiva probably goes back to the Neolithic in some relationship to the same Enlil, El, Kronos, Kumarbi type, who represents power and associated with mountains and with discipline. In Shaivism, we essentially have a version of Kronos that is not vilified, that isn't treated as this old, corrupt, tyrannical ruler, but actually as an embodiment of extreme discipline and power and healthy, masculine, protective energy. Vaishnavism, I won't get too much else into, but is largely most related to the Apollonian tradition in Greek, so around Apollo, the sun god, and also potentially around motifs of Ra, the Egyptian sun god. So essentially you have a Capricorn-esque Saturnian Shiva tradition, you have a Leo solar Vishnu tradition, and then you have a energetic thunder storm god Shakti Indra Sagittarian tradition. We've got Tishtar of Zoroastrian, another essential translation of this thunder god type Indo-European deity. There are interesting little linguistic coincidences, like with Thien Loi of the Vietnamese being another thunder god. Zeus, for instance, comes from the same basis as Skyfather does in Proto-Indo-European, which would be Dios, Deus, which means day. And so the word day really refers to the sky. Zeus being a thunder god, there's three types of main Skyfathers. There's the Sagittarian type, which is storm. There's the Leo type, which is the sun. Then there is Aquarian type, which is the blue sky itself. Those are the three most popular sky fathers. Usually when I refer to sky father, a few slides from now, I'm referring to Aquarius or to Aether. And this is where I want to make another point, that just because the Indo-Europeans had a prominent thunder deity doesn't mean that they had the first and only thunder deity. They probably inherited their thunder deity from previous thunder gods. For instance, I actually forgot to list it here, but I just added to the bottom of the list, Ukko and Orko. They are both the thunder god of their respective pantheons in Finnish and Basque. This connection here is one way in which I'm wondering how much Western hunter-gatherer influence is at the core of this kind of thunder god. Since the Basque live in northern Spain, and they have lived there before almost any other recorded group, Finno-Ugric languages up in Finland have potentially a mix of Eastern and Western hunter-gatherers. Many of these old hunter-gatherer caribou hunters would follow the tundra all the way up into places like south of Finland and Russia and such. This thunder deity might have actually been common to both people, and that's why we see this relationship here. Orko might actually also relate to an old Greek and Roman deity of Orcus or Horkos, who's a chthonic god of oaths and the underworld, and also ultimately might relate to the word orc, which comes from ogre, which was a Caucasian name for a sort of giant, very much the same as a Titan or a Jotun. Nonetheless, here with these two, we can see something of a connection, as not simply a hero all the time, but as having a dark side as well. I think every deity here should have a light and a dark side. Not necessarily a more dualistic view, but a integral view. Gods should be just as complex as people are, I think, which is quite contrarian to any sort of monotheistic or monistic view of God, that God should be completely separate and different from humans. To me, that would be a worldview that is very anti-human. And then there's Li Shen of Chinese and Raijin of Japanese. And Raijin is similar to the Orko, quite chaotic. He's not overtly evil, but he does create chaos. There's great artistry in his depiction of these drums that he beats to make the thunder, and the bags of wind that he carries, and I really like that portrayal. We also have Tahaki of the Maori, Polynesian mythology, who are quite benevolent and heroic in their deeds. And then to the other side of the world, we find deities like Tlaloc, Chak, and Ilapa of Amerindian pantheons. They are also seen as largely benevolent and largely as rulers in their pantheons. but they definitely have dark sides. And we also have Thobad Zishini, who's a Dene or Navajo deity as well, but he too is a thunder god. A lot of the thunder gods in Amerindian myth, a hero often coupled with a twin, the other twin being more magical. One of the twins, the thunder twin, having thunderbolts that he's given by his father, or again, Thunderbird, a spiritual entity that he interfaces with, in order to defeat great beasts and monsters, protect his people. And a lot of these stories kind of stem from really the history of Amerindians traveling so far across Siberia and into Alaska and into the Americas. A few of their stories are about travel in this sense of like taking their people through the wilderness and smiting great beasts. And some of these beasts maybe were something like mastodons or other ice age mammals and megafauna that have since gone extinct. I think giant sloths were also somewhere on eastern United States. Or perhaps they're referring to when they were back in Siberia, the Neanderthals or the Denisovans that they interfaced with, or maybe they're just referring to animals in general, or maybe it's purely made up, very similar to titans and ogres that I mentioned earlier. It could be any one of those things. Again, implying that this thunder god has some relationship to usurping a generation of giants. There's the concept of Wakanyan in Sioux mythology as well, are not so much gods or a god, but they're spirits of the West that come and select worthy heroes, essentially, from among the people. And the name means sacred wings, so they're essentially the Thunderbird. And these Thunderbirds show themselves to worthy people, and they become kind of divinely possessed, let's say, almost like demigods. This is kind of similar to the motif in a lot of the Assassin's Creed games of the eagle or the hawk, or this bird spirit that is watching over the main character, the Gary Stew. He's the chosen one, right? Now, this hero to the Sioux is actually called the Heoka. He is a sacred clown in the sense. There's something of a almost Woden-like madness, almost Dionysian in the way they embrace life and represent and manifest and channel these archetypal forces. They come to rebel when rebellion is necessary. They come to criticize when criticism is needed. They come to dance and, in a very therapeutic way, express what is not being expressed by the people or the culture at that time. So that is something of a true hero. They're often depicted later once horses become common to the Sioux tribes on horseback. And that hero archetype, for me, fits within the other deity card that I have in this set of Sagittarius, and he's called Tyrannos. That's meant not in a tyrannical way, although maybe it is, because a tyrant is not necessarily a bad thing. Meant to be a hero who rises up to lead when it is absolutely necessary, when the previous system is in tatters and a failure. And Tyrannos is depicted on horseback, and he's the hero, he's the conqueror, he's the liberator. And that's the more personified humanistic version of this Sagittarian thunder god archetype. For Thandros here, I basically represent him as that Thunderbird, that spirit which blesses the hero and sides with him and watches over him in his ambition. And that's very similar to how Zeus and a lot of these other thunder gods and other pantheons are treated in heroic and demigod type myths. He's watching over and rooting for the hero and is the deus ex machina in many scenes. He comes in and he interferes to make things go that hero's way. And that's really why this relates to the hero's journey, the monomyth, a lot. In today's cinema, we criticize this story as being samey and frankly unrelatable because these people almost always succeed and often they seem to be just handed success. And a lot of coincidences occur, and that's a byproduct of bad writing for sure. But what I think could be interesting is that essentially the writers of those stories, in all their bad writing and all of their contrivances and all of their forced deus ex machinas and stuff, they are basically being Zeus. They're being the Thunderbird in that situation, and they're pulling strings to make their hero heroic, you know. And I think it would be more interesting to have more stories that actually embody those types of forces, almost at least in a humorous way. In the myths of Hercules, I mentioned in the Greek video, there are many times that he is bailed out by Zeus or by some other god or goddess, and in many of the myths, the gods and goddesses take sides and help or hinder any particular hero along their journey. It's not as simple as some contrivance to get the hero to go ahead. It's a conversation about different motifs and different archetypes and how they do and don't align. And that's interesting. And the different stories of how all the different gods would compete and bicker with one another over what they think is right is actually quite interesting and fun to read. We need some more literature like that.